So last April, we tested this idea of this choose your own adventure. And the concept was like giving you an opportunity to actually decide what's spoken about. One of those things, like you come here all the time listening to what I think you want to hear. And you guys keep showing up, which is a good sign. And the other piece to it, though, is that like how could we create a little bit more dialogue between you and me? And this is one of those ideas we thought, why don't we do on certain months, we do these choose your own adventures. And so if you've been following us on Instagram, some of you would know that you've actually voted on a lot of these topics. And so we put up group A versus group D and B and C, whatever, and you vote which collection of questions you want more. And then we kind of pool them together. And what happens is we end up with 5 on one side, 5 on the other side, and you get to vote which ones. And last time we did in April was like tons of fun. People loved it. And so we wanted to do it, and we want to find a way to create, where this becomes kind of a part of the DNA of the project, because we want to hear what you care about. And then actually what we did is we let you tell us what topics you want to hear about. And those are the topics that are actually in that jar right there. And so I'd like to pull from them. Hopefully, I think we should have enough time to do that. We're going to make it happen. So what we're going to do is, like we said, the groups that won was, why is it so hard to trust the church? How do I get out of debt? And here's the ones that you can get. So there's 4 on each side, and their verses. We'll go through one at a time. Now, one of them's already been up. And what we're going to do is we're going to put it up, and we're going to give you about a minute with some game show music, because that's how it really counts, is if there's game show music, and it makes you feel anxious. And then you forget about the fact that you didn't get anything to drink. And it's a really good vibe, right? And so we're going to give you a minute to vote. And so I know that a lot of you already voted, but we're going to do the first one as a bit of a test again, okay? So the first one is actually still up there. So why is it so hard to trust the church versus how do I get out of debt? Right now, the church one is winning. And if you are watching online, you get an opportunity to do it too. You can see it on Instagram. If you don't follow us, it's at the Project YEG on Instagram. Make sure you do it. So we're going to give you 1 minute starting now to finish the voting off on the first question. Go for it. All right, I guess that's the end of that one. The one that won was, why is it so hard to trust the church? None of you care about getting out of debt, which is bad, because statistically, you're the worst at it. But anyways, let's talk about the church. It was a really good question. It's one of those things that actually I think we get a good amount, because I think there's a lot of people that are hurt by the church. I think there's a sense when you come into church, this idea that it should be safe, that there should be a place where you can be safely vulnerable, that you can be authentic with who you are. Unfortunately, that's not usually that happens. And I think there's a lot of people that sometimes come into church, they maybe connect with someone or connect to something, or maybe they're trying to but never do. There's so many different circumstances, probably even within this room, while you're maybe having a hard time trusting the church. Let alone the stories we've heard just in the last how many months of these really well-known pastors who were stuck in some sort of money problem, or sex addicts, or sexual assault. You think of the whole Me Too movement, and you think about the Catholic Church. You think about the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the largest denomination in America. The amount of sexual assaults that are happening, that have happened, and coming to light. And so you're thinking, shouldn't this be the last place where this stuff happens? And I think it's kind of and not to, because I don't want to excuse the church. I don't think we can excuse the church. I think the church has some things it needs to deal with and needs to work through. But just hear me out. I only have a couple minutes to do this. The first thing is, it's kind of like any relationship you risk having with someone. I think about my relationship even with my wife, and that sometimes the person you're most open with can also be the person that hurts you the most. And that's why it's super careful to pay attention to who you're getting in bed with, in a sense, who you're getting this relationship with. And I actually think it should be the same with church. I think it shouldn't be an arbitrary decision just to go somewhere. You should be asking questions like, what are you about? What are your accountability processes like? What if I do fall to the cracks? Where are my connecting points? Where can I find a way to get involved? Or if there's something does happen, you try to resolve those things. And sometimes I think it can be a lot of miscommunication on lighter end things like no one called me back or anything like that. And you got to work through those things. But another piece to it is that the church is filled with these people, these things called humans. And sometimes we suck. And sometimes people who, like me, who are pastors, who you think you can trust, decide to use whatever power or authority or privilege or platform they have and abuse it. That happens. And it's a terrible thing. You look at even the Bible, and there's this book called Acts. If you're not familiar with the Bible, it's like there's like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's the stories and life of Jesus. And then right after, there's the story of Acts. And it's basically the acts of what happened after Jesus died and rose again, and this new church started. And it's awesome. You read it, and I think it's in Acts 4. It talks about this new church gets together, and they're sharing everything, and they're praying together. And it sounds like super wonderful. And people are like literally selling pieces of land to help the needy in their own church. And it says that people would be added to their numbers daily. You know what's really funny though? Like a chapter after that, there's like this couple, Ananias and Sapphira, and they end up holding back money and they end up lying about it. And even at the beginning of this wonderful thing, there was a lot of issues, because the biggest issue the church has is that it's filled and led by humans. And this is why I think the church has to move beyond me on stage and in this building, and you come here and you listen and you take in and hope everything's okay. Church is actually meant to be like a family where we keep each other accountable. And your role is to make sure the church is accountable in the right ways. And the church's role is to help you keep accountable in your life too, in your walk with Jesus, and your walk with other people, and your walk with, in your relationship with even creation. Are we being accountable to those things? And we learn, and we adjust together. And so I'd say this: if you want a better church, be a better church. There's a role where it's on all of us to do that. And I do think there's places where churches need to have a reckoning with their leadership and what's going on. But I think one of the reasons why it's hard to trust a church is because it's hard to trust just people in general. And I think our trust in institutions is like really eroding because a lot of institutions are terrible. And so do I have a fix for it? Well, in some way, yes. Accountability. Things need to be brought in light. That's your responsibility. If you see something wrong, say it, name it, deal with it. And part of it is, how can we together, and this is the role of the project, is how, it's not just what we do. We're here to reach young adults who don't know Jesus yet in Edmonton. But did you know that the secondary part of that is your role? And we do it together. And how do we do it together? How do we build something wonderful together? If you want a place that's safe for people, how can we make it safe for people? If you want it to be a place that's accountable, how are we each accountable to each other? And how do we do that in a better, more richer, wonderful way? And some of you are thinking, I wish he talked about debt. Now, let's go to the second set of questions. The second set of questions is this: what's wrong with a little pot versus why should I care about God? Your 1 minute to vote starts now. It is no surprise on Canada Day's long weekend, you want to know, can I smoke a little pot? It's no wonder that one won. And you know what's really funny? So we've actually, when it got legalized, that Sunday, we actually did a whole series, or not a whole series, we did a whole night on this. And so we didn't do just 5 minutes, we did like a good 27 to 32 minute kind of idea of Christianity and pot. That was last October. And I actually get this question pretty frequently because I think for a while the church hid behind the idea of like, well, it's illegal, so you can't do it. And Canada's like, it's not illegal. And we're like, oh. And we're trying to make, a way around this. Like, can I smoke a little pot? And the idea is that it is legal for you to do it. It is. And it's not like we can just wag our finger and be like, and so we have to find a new way around this. And there is this verse in the Bible, this guy named Paul, he writes a lot of books in the New Testament, so the latter half of the Bible, and there's this one book, it's to this church in Corinth, and it's it's one of those churches that are like way off balance. And they're asking questions like this, not like pot, but other things. Can I have sex with my mother-in-law? That's literally one of the questions they're asking, right? Which is like, that's when you know something's wrong in the church. And asking questions like this. And it's funny, Paul answers because there's these gray areas, right? It's not like Jesus is like, thou shalt not smoke the herbs of the earth, right? Like, there's not that, right? There's these gray areas, and Paul addresses some of these gray areas by saying something like this. Hey, listen, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. And I think one of the ways that I would probably give insight into this question is, one, you're all adults. You have to make a decision for yourself. I'm not going to make it for you. But let's just think about a few things. First question I'd ask you is, why are you doing it? Because I think motive is a huge piece to it. Like, why are you wanting to smoke pot? Why are you doing it? And you need to ask yourself, is that the kind of thinking that I want to not only create right now, but recreate over and over again as to why I smoke pot? And I'll kind of get to a little bit more later, but that's an important question. Why am I doing it? What is my motive behind it? Is it a justifiable motive in my head? Is it a justifiable lifestyle that I want? Now, I will say this. Studies do show that pot smoking is actually not addictive, but what it does to you, and especially the psychological, I guess, in a sense, feelings you get are addictive. And it leads me to the first thing. There is always a responsibility, I think, not only in Scripture, but I think in just being a human being, to know. Know what it is and what it isn't. Now, study after study after study shows that before the age of 25, pot can have a significant negative effect on someone's cognitive development. Significant. You can go to Canada's website about this stuff. You can go to many websites. It's so easy to find. You Google it, you'll find all the things. And like some huge issues with it when it comes to not only just the development cognitively, but it comes to even psychosis and other mental ailments, and depression has a huge effect. And they say before the age of 25, you should very much question. And the more you use it before the age of 25, the worse the effects can get, and they're irreversible. Okay? They make irreversible effects on your brain. But you're like, good, I'm 27, I'm in the clear. Well, not completely. I think it's still your responsibility to know what pot is and what it does and what it cannot do. Some of you are like, well, what about drinking? Like Christians, they can maybe drink like a bottle or beer here or there. You got to understand, no one likes, like if you have like a beer on a warm day, most people won't get like even any effects about it. But like no one likes like, I'm just going to smoke a little bit of pot before I get buzzed. It doesn't work that way. And there is a verse in the Bible that talks about anything that would basically hinder your straight thinking, you need to think twice about doing. Anything that's going to take over you is something that you should stray away from, and that's kind of what pot does. But the first responsibility is to know. Second responsibility is to know that if you are a Christian in this room, your responsibility to move towards greater levels of freedom, not greater levels of being hindered. That's what I mean. If you smoke pot to get some sort of psychological release because you're under so much stress and anxiety, that is only going to perpetuate your need for that further. It doesn't lead you to freedom. If you're doing it so that you can be accepted socially, it's actually not leading you to greater levels of freedom in that area. In fact, it's making you more self-conscious, and it's something that could increasingly be a problem in your life. If it's not moving towards increasing levels of freedom, even if you're not a Christian, I think you need to be extremely careful about your engagement with it. The third thing is this, is that if you're a Christian in this room, there's a responsibility to the people around you. And even Paul talks about this in Corinthians. He says, not everything is permissible, but everything's beneficial. He says this, and you have to think about what it's doing to the people around you. How is it viewed? How is pot viewed in our culture in general? How is it viewed by parents around you? Could it lead someone else to levels of increased like hindrance in their life? What it does to maybe a sibling that's watching you or someone younger? What is it promoting? And if you're a Christian, you're kind of responsible for that as well. And you think about what it's doing. At the end of the day, you're an adult. I can't make those decisions for you. I just think that it's something that is not neutral, and you have to think very carefully about. And if you're a Christian, I think you need to process that. So some of you are like, man, you just ruined my Canada Day plans. But that's honest. And I know it's a huge question. I'm not moving around the bush, because I know a lot of you are asking this question because you want to know. And that is honestly how I feel about it and how I think you should process. So your responsibility to know, your responsibility to increasing levels of freedom, and lastly, your responsibility to those around you. And they need to be thinking, what is my motive behind it? Is it leading me to greater levels of those things? Third set of questions. It all starts in the head versus is porn or masturbation really that bad? Go ahead. You got 1 minute starting now. All right. So it looks like, by just actually a very small margin, is porn/masturbation really that bad? Those are, it's funny. It's one of those things where I know that there has been, for a while, there is this concept that porn and masturbation is completely and full out negative. Now, hear me out when I'm talking about this, okay? And I know there's been a growing consensus of people that's going, maybe it's actually not that bad for you. Maybe it's we've just gone way too far one end and extremes, things like that. I think there is a part where I think this church has been super extreme on this message, where it's like, if you touch it, an angel dies, right? Like, I think there's you look at it and some sort of bunny explodes, right? There's just, I think there's been these extremes, like totally. And here's the thing though, I know statistically that well over 85% of you, female and or male, are either engaging or have engaged in porn and masturbation. And not only that is that those actual trends and statistics are actually only growing, especially among women, very fast. And so for the churches to be like, it's wrong, does you no help. Now, the Bible is pretty clear on the idea of like anything that drives you to a point of like reducing yourself to this sexual animal and someone else towards that. It's a sin against you and a sin against someone else. It also talks about this thing called sexual immorality, and one of the words it uses is actually porneia, which is pornography. It comes from. It's the idea of like anything that releases a lot more lust in you, again, gets you out of control of your own body, is really just a sin against yourself. And there's a lot of people who they can't control it. And so sometimes we justify it because we have no control over it. Here's why I have issue with it. Now, I think the Bible does have issue with porn and masturbation for a few reasons. I think we need to think, let's go a big picture here. The industry of pornography and what it promotes and pushes, you cannot deny that has a huge effect on the sex trafficking industry. It has a huge effect on what it does as it enslaves a lot of especially young women and children, because there is a sense that there's nothing that I think is as strong as a drive than our sexual drive. It's a huge amount of pent-up energy in us, and I feel like God has created us with that, and I know God has created us with that sexual tension and the energy and the desire. But when it's mishandled and misused, it leads to this ferocious animal that wants as much as it can, when it wants it, how it wants it, with who it wants it. And I don't think it always leads to anything super, super bad where someone's like, I've got like 10 children in my basement. I'm not saying it leads to that all the time. But it drives that industry because it's always supply and demand. And I know that there's actually ethical porn out there where everyone is consensual to the arrangement that they've made to make this whatever the porn movie is or whatever it is. And I think for you, though, you need to be asking the same question about pot. Is this leading you to increasing levels of freedom? And is it leading the people that you're watching into increasing levels of freedom or burden? The industry that it's driving, unfortunately, if it's an industry you're okay with, well, you're driving that industry. If you're not okay with it, well, you are driving an industry you're not okay with. Does it line up with the values you have? Another big picture of this is that I think it actually devalues the opposite sex or whatever sex you're into. I think it devalues it in a huge way. It makes someone your toy in a sense. Porn has this ability to give you everything you want, when you want it, how you want it, with who you want it. You can select your hairstyle, you can select, your extremes, everything. You can do it. I'm going to tell you right now, a healthy relationship doesn't work that way. There's a lot of people that get married, and I talk to, and it's not just the girls. Sometimes it's the guys who's going, I don't know what she wants or what he wants, but I don't know where they got these ideas, but I do not want to do that. Because there is constantly this idea in your head that that's what sex is. It's getting something out of it when you want it, and it drives that. And there's a lot of relationships and marriages that are strained because of that, because that is not what love actually is. Love is, in Scripture, is this sacrificial, this mutuality of giving oneself and not demanding for yourself. And I don't care who you are in this room. We will debate until we both die that porn is not going to make you a better mate at all. When it comes to the area of masturbation, there's a sense of self-gratification in it. And it's kind of the same idea, is if I can gratify myself, then I can control how that happens and where that happens. And I'm telling you, you may be able to control something right now, but you can very quickly get it out of control later. And some of you are in this room, maybe you're struggling with it. You need to know that you are not alone. And I think there's healthy ways to process this. and healthier ways to move you towards places of freedom where you feel like you can talk about it in an open, safe environment, and maybe get some tools on how to navigate this area of your life. Because I think you need to. I think the Lord wants to move you towards that, and I think that the Holy Spirit can do a great work in your life because I've seen it in a number of people's lives. Is porn or masturbation really that bad? I really think it is. Do you know that they are saying that there's an increasing level of violence in sexual relationships between college-age students, primarily because most of the sex education that teenagers are getting are in pornography. And the two most engaged kinds of porn is choking and anal sex. And that is in counseling sessions across the country. They're seeing more and more relationships damaged because of that kind of thinking about sex. And people, especially women, feeling uncomfortable saying no. And it's actually damaging people physically, emotionally, psychologically, and I think spiritually. And what they're saying is especially because mobile devices, I mean, before, like in like the 80s, like whatever, you'd have to like put a hood on and a hat with some glasses and walk in and be like, oh, I'll get to Playboy first. What'd you want? Playboy. What'd you want? Just give me a Playboy, right? Like, and you'd have to hide in secret. Now it's like on your phone. And anywhere you want it, you have access to it. And free and easy access. And it's having a huge effect on people's thinking when it comes to what sex is in a relationship. And I think it's driving an overvaluing sex in a relationship. Listen, sex is good and it's important. But in a long, healthy, fulfilling marriage, sex is not the end-all, be-all. It's much more. Sex is a response to a commitment that is renegotiated every day as you choose to love each other. And it's enjoyable and it's good. And I think that there's a lot of freedom in the bounds in the right situation. And we believe that in marriage is the right situation for it. There's a lot of freedom there, but I think it's something, if it's something you're having a hard time with, then I think you need to reach out for help, and we want to help you through it. If you're here and you think there's nothing wrong with it, that's okay. That's how you think about it, and I'm not going to press my feelings or my beliefs on you, but I'd really encourage you to just know more about it. And maybe think through, is this affecting how I view the opposite sex or view another person and how relationships and sex should be? Can I leave it there? There's like a lot more, and honestly, this is not the first or last time we'll probably be addressing this topic, as it is a major topic that people ask. Last set of questions that you guys voted on before we get to the bonus round is this: my proposal story, a story of what not to do, versus the most powerful motivator. And I have a feeling I know which one you're going to choose. And it starts now. I'm not surprised. You guys' proposal story. I'll be honest with you, I'm really glad my wife's not listening to this tonight. I know she's not. And this is actually the first time I've ever shared this story. And it's a little embarrassing. I am not romantic whatsoever. At all. This needs to be a lesson for anyone who's planning on asking anyone to marry them at some point, what not to do. And first of all, like my wife said no the first time, by the way. And yeah. How did it get there? Well, good question. So we met in Edmonton. I'm originally from Ottawa, and she's from actually Drayton Valley, and we met in Edmonton, and we had dated for a couple years, and it's funny, we knew we were going to get engaged, whatever, and at some point, and I ended up buying the ring, and I don't know what happened. I think I told a friend who actually told someone else. And they ended up telling Catherine, my wife, that I had bought a ring and I was going to propose to her on a certain day. So I call her up. I'm like, hey, listen, hey, girl, let's go out. And here's the thing. This is the same guy that the first date with Catherine, I told her my mom was paying for it. Like, that's how terrible it is. And so so I'm like, let's go out tonight. And she's like, don't do it tonight. I'm like, do what? I know what you're doing. I'm like, no. And I'm like, listen, let's do this. And I mean, it was in the middle of school or college, and we had tons of assignments. I'm making excuses right now. And I thought the romantic thing was to go to this top floor of my school and make her a really romantic PowerPoint. And like, I didn't even take her out to dinner. And I was using her car. I was poor. And, but I'll tell you what, my wife will tell you I did not cheap out on the ring. And I spent a lot of money on that ring. Anyways, and I took her up to this third floor, and she was like, not happy. And I'm like, once she sees my PowerPoint, oh man, she's gonna love it. And she saw it, and she's like, no, I am not doing it this way. I do, like, she said no to me. She's like, can you take me home? I am like super anxious at this point, and I'm like, oh no. Like, I can, like, for me, like, it was so, like, I have no romantic bone in my body. I'm like, to think this all over again. And like, that's what I came up with, right? And so I'm like, okay, I'll take you home. And I started driving her around, and I'm like, listen, like, I just started sharing my heart, why I wanted to like marry her, and like, why I wanted to do it, and I was so sorry and things like that. And she ended up like, she's explaining kind of what she wanted, whatever, like, thought. And we ended up like back at her apartment, and I got on my knee, and like, I basically begged her to say yes, and she did. And we took these pictures of us really happy. But like, I'll tell you what, it's been 13 years. And so there's hope. But let me tell you, if you do a terrible job of proposal, even after 13 years of a pretty great marriage, they will still bring it up to you. And they will still tell you that you owe them for that one, because it was terrible. Like, I literally made a PowerPoint. And then I trapped her in a car to convince her to say yes in her crappy apartment, 118th Ave. But then I tell her, you're the one that said yes, so... That was terrible. That is my proposal story. And honestly, like, I'm so embarrassed to tell you, because you probably lost so much respect for me. And I apologize that I did that to you. And now your view of me tainted. And yeah, anyways, let's go to this. This is good. If you have more questions about it, I definitely will not answer them, or I'll just make them up. But here's a jar of, we asked you to give us a few questions of what you want to hear, what you want to talk about, and so we did, and we put them in here. I had a quick glance at maybe it's some questions, but I don't know which one I'm choosing or anything like that, and so we'll just go as it is. We won't have game show music for it, but here's a question. Good thing I'm not a racist. Some of you, is a good statement. And it is a good thing you're not a racist. I think part of this was the idea of like, those people, it's like, well, I have a black friend, I'll be honest with you. Can I encourage you just very quickly? No one in this room, I think, wants to have some sort of prejudice against anyone. That's my hope for all of you in this room. I always have to ask myself, and I think you need to ask yourselves, though, could I, though? Could I have a prejudice? Is there a people group, in a sense, where I already have preconceived notions about them? Last week we talked about this idea of people we disagree with, and how it's a lot easier for us to label people because then we don't have to do the hard work of actually understanding nuance in human beings. And one of the things we need to do when we're engaging in conversation with people is actually to strip away labels and to actually ask people their stories. And as much as it's a statement, can I encourage you, one, never to say that. Good thing I'm not a racist. The other thing, too, is going, but could I be prejudiced in some way against somebody? And I think one of the great things we need to do, and I have to ask myself all the time, too, is sometimes there's things that I think and believe about people purely because of what other people have said or experienced, but I actually have never experienced that from people. That's where my ideas come from. And can I encourage you to maybe think that you could be wrong, and you're always erring on safety when you think you could be? Can I leave it there? Okay, next question. We got a few more minutes. Does Jesus care about climate change? Very quickly, yes. He created you for 3 reasons. If you look at like the creation story, Genesis, which literally means beginning, and that he actually created us with 3 relationships. A relationship that we're responsible for with God, a relationship with each other responsible for, and the third one is a relationship with earth. And there is this idea that prevails in churches like, well, when Jesus comes back, he's just going to burn up the earth. That's actually not in the Bible. And you get this idea of actually heaven coming to earth and restoring it back to what it was created for, to be living and healthy, to be vibrant, to work the way it's supposed to. But it's interesting. Jesus had this prayer that he wanted us to pray, and it's just like this. May your kingdom come on earth like it is in heaven. What God desires is a restoration of earth. And you and I are responsible for the way that we handle earth, the way we treat it or mistreat it. 3 relationships you're responsible for. One with God, the one with other people, and also a relationship with earth. He does care about climate change. And so should you, by the way. No, I read a story on Facebook that told me it's fake. If you got to go to Wikipedia for your sources, you didn't do enough digging. Here's interesting questions. Do demons still exist today? That's a really good question. So again, Paul, he writes in this book called Ephesians, he's like, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers of darkness, basically things we don't see. There is this inertia, I believe this spiritual inertia that was meant to drive towards God, but there is a spiritual reality that I think wants to disrupt peace in 3 things. Disrupt peace between you and God, disrupt peace between you and yourself with your identity, and disrupt the peace you have with other people. And I honestly think that there is this spiritual reality. You know, it's that feeling like there's something other than this. That the whole idea, and the Bible talks about Satan or this enemy and the idea of being a liar and it wants to steal, kill, and destroy. And I think that there is a spiritual reality that includes these things called demons. And I don't think they're like all carrying pitchforks and like, spitting blood and things like that. But I think their idea is this, is how can I disrupt peace that you have between you and God, you and yourself, and you with other people? And this is why when you look at the Bible, the other inertia that God is leading us towards is that we do have an increased level of freedom with him, peace within ourselves, and peace with other people. I mean, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, self-control, all those things. And all those things have to do with relationships. All those things have to do with giving of yourself. Even the idea of love is patient, love is kind, love is everything. It demands sacrifice in order to increase peace between us and God, in ourselves, and with other people. And I think there is a spirituality that wants to move us away from that. One more question, is that okay? You guys don't care. We'll end on this one. This is a good one. How to be content with singleness. That's a great question. We have this idea that being alone is a bad thing. And I think a major reason why there's so much loneliness in our world today is because people don't know how to be alone. And that's a different thing. Being alone and loneliness are 2 very different things. Loneliness is the idea that you are somehow imperfect or skewed because you don't have anyone to attach your life to. Being alone is the ability to fully recognize that who God created you to be and who you are is enough. And until you have a really good grasp on who you are and how you're made, and finding a sense of contentment and fulfillment in who you are as a person. I'm not even talking about in a relationship status of singleness, just who you are as a person. I actually think you're going to have unhealthy expectations on anyone you date or marry or whatever. No one is going to be able to fulfill you. No one needs to be responsible for your happiness or your joy, your fulfillment. You've got to find a way to come to grips with that yourself. I believe we are created for relationships, but not in a sense of dependency, but interdependence. That we choose to give ourselves to each other in this interplay of not only enjoying each other, but also trying to help the other person express who they are in much richer and broader ways. How do you be content with singleness? I think the idea is you have to start, honestly, being thankful for who you are. Be thankful with who you are. What is something you're super happy about? If you walk with Jesus and you have a relationship with him, what's one thing you're thankful that God made you? Maybe if you're here and you don't have a relationship with Jesus, what's just something you're thankful about yourself? Be thankful. It's amazing. And every day you should be thankful for a way that you're created and with who you are. I think another thing too is social media is a trap. And we have this idea of this comparison trap of like what you view should be what you should look like. In fact, they say there's an increasing level of people not wanting to be naked in a locker room, which to me is a positive thing. It's always the 89-year-old man who's just like freewheeling, right? But the reason why, and there's actually increased level of people of having less intimacy in marriage and in some relationships because there's a sense of like everything they view looks so perfect on social media. That's kind of what they're filtered through everything, and they're so scared of their own imperfections. And we know it. Like, we totally know that so much stuff is like airbrushed and filtered and like people are spending hours taking the right photo. Like, we know that stuff, but we don't, right? And I think that one of our reasons why we're so discontent with ourselves is because we view ourselves through the lens of social media. And until we become thankful, we won't learn how to curb comparison. Because one of the parts of being thankful for who you are is realizing that there's a lot of things that you're not, and that is okay. And that's actually what makes you fully human. Because when you realize what you're not, that is when you begin celebrating other people for who they are. And I think when we become thankful and when we celebrate other people, I think it helps curb that idea that I'm somewhat skewed because I'm by myself or I'm single. Also, say this, Jesus was single. That's good. He never got married. And nowhere in the Bible is like marriage or parenthood elevated above being a single person. Nowhere. Singleness is a super important piece to your own development as a person. Be happy, be content. Is it always easy? No, but that's where you can start. Guys, hope you enjoyed tonight. It's a totally different format. I hope you had fun. Just so you know, do you know that there's over 150,000 young adults in Edmonton? 150,000 young adults. Do you know just in our 3 major universities alone, there's over 80,000 young adults? Can I challenge you, who's one person that your life can have an impact on who doesn't know Jesus yet? The project is meant for that one person, to be a safe place where you can come and interact with the ideas and life of Jesus. And we did a baptism last week of people whose lives changed because of Jesus. Can I encourage you and challenge you to be thinking of who's that one person who can have an impact on? That's who the project is for. But I'm done. Guys, have a great night. Enjoy the food trucks. Take a chance on it. And we'll see you next week. We start a new series. It's simple.